Democracy is a word that many people associate with freedom, equality, and human rights. However, not always and not everyone saw only positive aspects in democracy. One of the most famous critics of democracy was the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. This wise man, whose ideas became the foundation of Western philosophy, saw democracy not as an ideal, but as a serious threat to the stability and well-being of society. So why did he feel this way about this system of government? Let's get to the bottom of it. The birth of democracy, ideals and reality. Democracy as a form of government originated in ancient Greece, namely in Athens. It was an era of change when citizens sought a fairer government, abandoning aristocratic rule, where power was concentrated in the hands of a few. In Athens, every citizen had the right to participate in decision-making, which seemed like a revolutionary step forward. In reality, however, Athenian democracy was far from modern notions of equality. Only free male citizens had the right to vote, and women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded from political life. In addition, participation in politics required time and money, which automatically limited the circle of real participants in democratic processes. Despite these limitations, Athens became a symbol of democratic ideals. But already in those times, there were people who saw in this system its weaknesses. One of such people was Socrates. Socrates, in his view of democracy, Socrates is a figure surrounded by legends. We know about his teachings thanks to his students, particularly Plato. Socrates did not leave behind any written works, but his ideas and method of dialectic had a great influence on subsequent generations of thinkers. In his reflections, Socrates often severely criticized democracy. He believed that such a form of government, where decisions are made by the majority, inevitably leads to the power of demagogues and incompetent people. Socrates saw in democracy the danger of relying on emotions and opinions rather than knowledge and reason. The metaphor of the ship, an argument against democracy. One of Socrates' most famous arguments against democracy was the ship metaphor. Imagine a ship that has to cross a rough sea. The captain must be a maritime, knowledgeable person, capable of making difficult decisions under extreme conditions. But what happens if the passengers decide to choose the captain by voting, based not on his experience but on personal sympathy? Socrates believed that such a ship would be doomed to wreck. He transferred this metaphor to the governance of the state. In his view, society should be governed by people with knowledge and virtue, not by those who are simply popular. Democracy, on the other hand, he believed, gives power to people who are far from understanding what is good for society. Demagoguery, a danger to a democratic society. Socrates foresaw that demagogues, people who know how to manipulate public opinion by promising simple solutions to complex problems, would flourish in a democratic system. Such leaders, he argued, often acted in their own interests rather than for the common good. The history of Athens confirms Socrates' fears. During the Peloponnesian War, 404 BC, Athens repeatedly fell victim to rash decisions made under the influence of charismatic speakers. This led to the weakening of the state and the loss of its dominant position in the region. Education and responsibility, key elements of governance. Socrates was convinced that in order to make important decisions, people must have knowledge and skills. He believed that a democratic system where every citizen has the right to vote is inherently unfair because it does not take into account differences in education and competence. He asked his students the question, would you entrust the government to anyone who just wants to run it? The answer was obvious. No. However, this is exactly what Socrates believed was happening in democracy. People without the necessary knowledge took part in governance, leading to chaos and mistakes. The trial of Socrates, the tragedy of democracy. The irony of Socrates' fate is that he became one of the first victims of Athenian democracy. In 399 BC, he was accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the god. A court of 501 citizens sentenced the philosopher to death. This trial was a prime example of how a democratic system can be used to suppress dissent. Socrates' death was a tragedy not only for his students, but for the entire Athenian democracy. It demonstrated that this form of government can be cruel and unjust when guided by emotion rather than reason. Socrates' legacy and lessons for modernity. Socrates' ideas about the need for education, wisdom, and responsibility in government remain relevant today. His criticism of democracy was not motivated by hatred of freedom or equality. On the contrary, he was concerned that society should develop harmoniously and that decisions should be made consciously and reasonably. Modern democracies have learned much from the lessons of the past. They strive to create systems of checks and balances to avoid the mistakes Socrates warned against. But his warnings about demagoguery, incompetence, and the dangers of emotion in politics remain an important reminder for all of us. Why did Socrates hate democracy? His criticism was based on a concern for the future of society, not a desire to reject freedom or equality. He believed that power should be in the hands of wise and educated people, not random individuals chosen for popularity. Democracy, as Socrates saw it, was too vulnerable to manipulation and error. Today, as we analyze the words of the great philosopher, we can see how profound his thoughts were. His ideas make us think about how we make decisions, how we choose leaders, and what it means to be a responsible citizen. After all, as Socrates himself said, ignorance is the root of all evils. If you like the ideas we discussed and want more of these kinds of deep thoughts on philosophy and life, don't forget to subscribe to our GreatsQuotes channel. Here you'll find inspirational quotes and lessons from great thinkers that help us deal with the present and build a better future. Share this video with your friends and stay tuned for more interesting and informative videos.